Right, so I think we've given enough time for people to join. I think there'll still be some people joining, so I hope that the people who come a few minutes late don't miss anything too gripping. But mostly it's just me introducing myself and introducing this talk. I'm really delighted to be here today because I've been invited by Boston University Marketing and the Communications Department of Boston University's Office of Research, who are running this workshop, and for all of the faculty and the staff and the researchers from across all of your campuses, which I've been reading about online to try and understand who I'm talking to today. Today's event is part of a sort of wider Boston University strategic communication series, I'm told, which I think is aimed at helping members of the community communicate their research and expertise sort of in a compelling way. And I'm kind of hoping that that's what my talk today is going to do. So my talk today is titled "How to Use Social Media to Promote Your Expertise and to Engage Target Audiences," which is a kind of a very big topic and fits really nicely with the sort of strategic goals of the sort of the wider series. My name is Dr. Matthew Partridge. Hopefully you've seen a bit of that on all the invite stuff. And I'm going to start this off by kind of telling you a little bit about the sort of the sort of who I am before I kind of get into sort of social media-y stuff. First of all, as a science communicator, which is really what I'm here today as, I really wanted to kind of set out what I've done with science communication to sort of make it clear that that's sort of something that I really do know about. So I started out in sort of like being a communicator in sort of 2012, doing a departmental blog. It was a really simple blog. 2012 was sort of WordPress was pretty big, and it was a really basic thing to just try and share the work that we were doing in our department and share things like we have PhD studentships and all these other sort of things that we could do. But really quickly, I found that I was kind of really enjoying it. I was enjoying the sort of the feedback we got from people. I was enjoying sharing things. So I turned it into kind of my own thing. And then it became something called Errant Science. And Errant Science is sort of what I sort of do now. So Errant Science was initially just a blog where I'd write about science. And then really quickly, I added in comics, because it turns out if you just write 1,000 words, people are kind of like, well, it'd be great with a picture. And I've then been doing that for about 7 years. I've been writing articles for magazines and drawing a lot of comics. I've been in social media since a little bit before that. I mean, 2011 really for sort of doing things like Twitter and all the other million social medias we'll get into later is fairly late to the game, but that was when I started it. That's when I wanted to kind of like promote myself as a scientist. And it's been great since then. I've done all sorts of stuff, not just talks like this to you guys over in America, but I've done things with the Royal Society of Chemistry in the UK, with Merck, who are based in Germany, and numerous universities all over the world, including Australia and things like that, which have been really messes with the time zones. And I've produced sort of training and live shows and science communication content for various university departments, for companies, all aimed at sort of sharing a sort of a core idea within their science and trying to kind of explain how to share science to kind of new audiences. I'd say the public, but that is a little bit too sort of vague. I'll kind of get into what I mean by sort of new audiences later. But I also wanted to make sure that I wasn't just focusing on the fact that I'm a science communicator, because I really want you to understand that I came into being a science communicator and doing this from academia. I actually have been a researcher for a very long time as well. I mean, I talked about a sort of departmental blog. Well, I mean, I have a BSc in biochemistry, a PhD in fiber optic chemical sensing, and I've spent the last sort of decade and a half making various forms of very clever fiber optic sensors. If anybody wants to hear more about those, I do video calls for free where I will just rant at you about how amazing my sensors are. It's pretty boring, but I love it. And I've been sort of doing this for a long time. I'm actually just doing social media and science communication at the moment, because that fits much better with the childcare that I do with my two lovely children. whereas writing loads of papers and writing patents and going to the lab every day doesn't gel so well. So I am focusing, and right now, 100% on trying to help other people communicate their science, which is sort of why I'm here today doing this, and why I kind of luckily have the time to do that. So that's kind of a bit about me, which is fantastic. But you all came here to learn something a bit about social media and using that, so we should really move on to that. And this is just very quickly how we're going to go through that story. So I've introduced myself. We're going to talk about why social media and why it's important, the types of social media, how to tell stories of yourself and how to tell stories of your work, and examples of what that looks like, because I think it's really important to kind of understand, you know, where other people have done things, because that kind of gives you an idea of what you could maybe do. How to socialize on social media, how social media doesn't always go brilliantly, and what are some problems and how to avoid those. Some positive outcomes of things that have been achieved by either myself, people that I have worked with, or people that I've helped train in sort of recent years, to try and, again, give you some idea of tangible outcomes that come from writing short little posts on places. There's going to be a little bit of an exercise at the end, nothing too much. I think like doing exercises doesn't always work perfectly via the sort of the wonders of Zoom. I mean, it's fantastic sitting here staring at my presentation and a tiny green light. You don't get the same back and forth that you do in a lecture theatre, and it's similarly quite difficult to do the sort of engaged stuff. And then lastly, I'll try and keep some time at the end for a kind of a Q&A. During the talk, if you have got questions, please do put them in the chat. We'll kind of scroll back through those later as well and try and answer as much as we can. But while I'm waffling away, I do kind of keep half an eye on the chat. And if there's something there that kind of comes up and sort of I notice that it links to the slide, either I'll try and actually then talk about it, or I'll sort of specifically say, oh, hey, someone's just said. This is really useful if I'm not explaining something very well, or if you feel like I've kind of rushed something that you want a little bit more on, but I make no promises. So sort of getting straight into it then, why should we be doing social media? And I think the best place to look at that is who's been publishing stuff. I mean, I know a little bit about the audience from Molly, who sort of shared a little bit about who you guys are and what your backgrounds all are. I mean, there's a lot of you, so I suspect the sort of diversity in backgrounds is quite large, but I would think most people here have in some way published their work, be it perhaps just as a poster at a conference or in sort of numerous sort of papers. That's sort of the traditional sort of sciencey way of doing stuff. Now, you might not be aware, but there's about 1.8 million papers published every year. I know from trying to keep up with the literature, it certainly, feels like a lot, but I wasn't really aware that it was 1.8 million. That figure is actually from about 2 years ago, when sort of a little study was done into it. And I know from talking to some editors that lockdowns around the world have really bumped the number of publications. People have been really clearing out their old data folders while they've been stuck at home with nothing to do but a laptop. And those sort of 1.8 million papers obviously are kind of cumulatively adding up. And there's about 50 million papers published in total, which is kind of a bananas amount of published data. The traditional way that science and research communicate is stick it in an academic journal and put your name to it and say, hey, go read this, please. And that sort of gives you the trying to get your work noticed out of that is very difficult, to kind of publish your work and then just hope upon hope that it's cited and that people realize that it is definitely super important and key to the very specific field of thin film and monolayer chemistry that you're publishing in. But you really are, as every year that goes by, it is becoming more and more, that you are throwing your paper into a phenomenally huge pile of papers, some of them with very questionable search engines. So there are sort of other ways of sort of sharing your science if you sort of try and do something a little bit better. There's some places are sort of blessed with sort of really good communications teams like you who can write you brilliant press releases. But that's that's a very specific and quite kind of involved route of kind of going out to the press. But as you as a researcher to sort of do more than take your paper, there's not really much you can do. All you can do is sort of add them to the vast index in the library and hope that somebody asks the right questions at the information desk and eventually finds your paper or your book, or even digs up your poster. The cartoon on your screen is actually a true story from a librarian last year, where somebody was looking for, again, specific piece of research by a specific researcher, and really did come in with a memory chip with photographs of references that they wanted to find. Librarians don't have their world easy. There's alternatives. You could stick post-it notes and just really wish that research gets noticed, because that's kind of it. That's, if you're a researcher and you're sat in your office and you're wanting your research to be noticed, short of cold calling other researchers, which most of them don't appreciate that, there's not a great deal that you can do to make sure that your science and the science of sort of your peers and science that you think is important and seminal can get itself noticed. And that's where social media can come in. That's part of the why of social media, is helping elevate what you've already produced or what you're already producing, and try and share it and try and show people a little bit of a window. So through that, you can kind of reach people you can't normally reach. I mean, social medias systems are vast, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about what they are and what different ones are and things like that shortly. But they give you the opportunity to talk to people you won't reach through other existing networks. You'll find people through social media that won't be going to the same conferences as you, that won't be reading the same journals and periodicals and review articles that you are. Or, particularly when I was starting out as a sort of relatively young researcher, I didn't know many other academics to kind of reach out to and to sort of find what other academics were doing. And it gave me people I could go talk to in social media were people I wouldn't otherwise have ever found or known of. And you yourself can then put things online and it's seen by a wider audience of people. It's seen by people who likewise are sort of in different groups and different areas. And you can look at your work as then a sort of a different thing. Instead of looking at a piece of work and saying, all right, okay, well, I think I've got enough data, or I think I've done something here that's now worth a 6-page paper in a review journal, or maybe like a 4-page paper in a letters journal. Whereas actually you can sometimes look at bits of your work and say, hey, actually it's not worth a paper. And it's, maybe not groundbreaking, but actually this is quite clever and quite interesting. And I kind of want people to share and see what I'm doing. And it makes you think about your work differently and in the way that it can be shared and talked about. And sort of almost lastly, the more you do it, the more you get to be good at doing it. The better a communicator you become. Nobody logs into social media. Well, generally people don't log into social media and then they have like 1 million followers and people absolutely adore you as a sort of an amazing communicator. It takes kind of, some people have a natural ability, but it also takes a lot of practice, learning how to talk about things and how to share things, which again, hopefully more of this talk will help you understand what you can do to kind of jumpstart that a little bit. But the more you talk about your work online, the better you might get talking about your work in lectures, the better you might get talking about your work when you're standing with your poster, the better a poster you might produce. If you're good at breaking your work down for social media, you're generally very good at breaking your work down into a poster. More communication makes you a better communicator. And lastly, and so far I've talked a lot about talking to other academics or talking to people in in similar fields or related fields, but it's very important that we talk to the public about science. That was, errant science was started not to share specifically, the science of clever fiber optic molecular sensors. Actually, a lot of the early articles and a lot of my early sort of cartoons and things as they are now are more about trying to explain what on earth some of the things that I do every day are. What is a pipette? What are boxes of tips? How do boxes of tips work? Because the public in general don't understand that. And it can be a very sort of ivory tower of sort of scientists that sit kind of looming over the public without them really understanding what witchcraft we're up to, when in fact what we're doing is, to some of us, terrifyingly boring some days, but to the public utterly fascinating, and trying to explain what we do and trying to open up our labs and go, hey, what we do isn't scary and it isn't really weird, it's actually brilliant and important. Is something I think we all have a responsibility to try and do better at. I think like this cartoon was something I did for the talk some time ago, which I think is a nice way of trying to persuade people to kind of look more at social media. And this was actually, a cartoon I made when I was trying to persuade one of our bosses at the time to invest a bit more in doing social media for the department, which they did. I'm not saying this cartoon was the thing that sold it, but I'm pretty sure it was. I mean, the cartoon's amazing, as are they all. So it was definitely this that did it, 100%. But it nicely sums up why engaging with the public and why engaging online is sort of helpful for people on both sides, both you personally and for your universities. Now, we'll look at more of those whys a bit later as sort of like how, what they were, what they end up achieving with some sort of outcomes and stuff. But one thing that's quite important to think about is who should be the people who do use social media. I mean, you've all signed up for this talk, and you've all sort of wanting to be here, and at least I hope you all want to be here. It wasn't mentioned that this was a compulsory talk, but it's you've hopefully you're all here thinking, I might try this, I might try and do this, and that's important. You've made kind of like a little bit of the first step, but again, I'd like to make it clear for sort of people in the audience who are here because they really aren't sure if they want to do this, that it really is only something that you should really do if you kind of want to do it. You don't have to have a burning passion to do it. You could just want to mess around with it. But it shouldn't be something that we all have to do. It's I don't want any scientist to think that they have a sort of a requirement to do social media, and if they don't do it, then they're very bad at what they do. I want people to use social media who enjoy, who want to enjoy it and want to find something to get out of it. If it's something that you feel you kind of you're forced to do, it's really not going to be a lot of fun, and it's that comes through on social media. If your account reads like a gun is being put to your head to do it, then that is not fun times. That is just a miserable account to read. So you don't want to be doing that. So it's really important that it's something that you do because you think you can get something out of it, and there has to be more than the person who's above you stops shouting at you to do social media. But we all have to deal with our bosses. So if you do pick a fight with your boss, please don't email me and complain. It's just a recommendation. So that kind of again, it's a bit of a whistle stop tour through the why and the who. But it's we'll come back to some of those a bit later, and it's something you can all ask about at the end if you want some more details on that. But again, once you've kind of gone through some of that, and you kind of in your head you think, yeah, there's at least one thing there I could kind of get behind. I can kind of think that would be something I would actually like. So I would give this a try. So the next thing is, what social media is there? Well, the answer to that is a lot. There's so much social media. I mean, you can't, throw a stone without hitting someone who is currently on social media. It is just everywhere, and it is saturating. And this slide really, I don't think, quite does justice to the amount of social media that is out there. This is a summary that I've just thrown some things in as and when I sort of hear about them or remember to update this slide, but there's countless things missing from here. And there are things here that I'm sure won't exist by the time I do this talk again later next year, perhaps. So it's an ever-changing, to some extent, world, and it's a world that feels quite daunting when you look at this kind of this vast array. I've put here some things that are quite science and research focused, things like ORCID and ResearchGate and Figshare, and I suppose a little bit GitHub and SlideShare. Which they are social media, but they are very much quite specific niche social media. You're not really going to be reaching the public much with those. You'll just be reaching sort of relatively small groups. So, when I say social media, I acknowledge that those exist, and that, it's great to do those, especially ORCID, because I don't know about Boston University, but universities where I've worked automatically update ORCID for me. I don't even need to do it. It's a social media network which apparently runs itself for me. So I like that one particularly. But all of these require kind of different amounts of effort, and all of these need sort of different work. I noticed there's like a question in the chat where someone's asking, like, how many hours per week or month do you need to do on these things? Well, funny you should ask. It really depends. There's an actual spectrum, really. And all of those social medias kind of sit somewhere different on that spectrum of effort or hours. I'll talk a bit later about how to sort of streamline the effort that you put in. But even as the outset, as you're sort of thinking about what social medias there are and how to do them, there's different social medias require different things. As I said, ORCID is practically effortless, but really the only people who are going to use it are possibly the people looking at these slides and going and clicking on my ORCID profile and going, oh yes, he does do papers. Then you get things like YouTube, where if you've ever made a YouTube video, they're really fantastic, really enjoyable things to do, but they are massive time sinks, especially to do them well. I mean, when you see sort of some excellent YouTubers like Vsauce and stuff like that, their content is phenomenal, but there are hundreds of hours behind those videos. And to produce similarly good, particularly sort of research-based content, you really can lose a great deal of time. Personally, I like more at the Twitter, Instagram level. That's where I kind of, and I think, that lends itself to kind of being quite entry level. They're quite easy to understand. They're quite quick to use. They're easy to share to a very wide, very diverse audience. And they provide good ways of kind of selecting or sub-selecting audience groups and all sorts of other things. And today I think I can't talk about all of these. It's just, to try and cover all of this is just crazy. And I'm really just going to try and focus on Twitter particularly. Partly, that Twitter is something that I use more than any of the other various things that I'm on. But to try and do all of them at once is just way too much. You can be, the most amazing academic ever or researcher ever and throw yourself on every single one of them, but it's just too many. You're gonna, for a start, you're going to exhaust yourself. And secondly, when you meet people and people say, oh, it'd be great to follow you on social media, if you're giving people a list of 20, they are going to follow you on none of those. So it's nice to try and, at least to start with, focus your efforts a little bit, not sort of overly kind of think that you need to be doing all of them. Just think that you need to be doing one of them to start with well, and if you see another one that's interesting later, you can kind of migrate, or you can do a bit on that as well, because they all have different pros and cons. But yeah, don't do them all. That's weird, but stick to one. And certainly today, I'm going to try and focus just on Twitter, because some of the lessons on Twitter actually do translate to other social medias as well quite readily. And it's quite an easy one to talk about and an easy one to demonstrate and kind of show some of the success cases, because I've been on it the longest as well. If there are specific questions about other ones, I'm sure I might get time to answer those at the end. But yeah, I'm going to try and focus it down at least a little bit today. Yes, we'll sort of see how that goes. So Twitter is, you know, it is relatively simple. As I said, it's relatively straightforward as a social media platform. For people who haven't seen Twitter or haven't used Twitter and are very happy to only ever have to hear about Twitter in the news when they're talking about what various celebrities have said or done on Twitter, then it really is sort of a single, generally speaking, it's a sort of a, you sign up and you have a feed, and on your feed you follow different people. So for example, if I followed the Times Hire and the British Heart Foundation and my friend who's really into cellular research, and then every time they share a post or share a message, it appears on your feed, which is that lovely feed on the right hand side of the slide. And they're just short text. They can be text with some images, text with a video, with a sort of a moving image or a GIF, or they can be sort of like a poll. You can ask people questions and they can tick various answers. And you get to choose who you follow, and you get to kind of follow people or unfollow people. You can follow a particular hashtag, which I'll talk about a bit more later. And so you end up with sort of a curated timeline of the people and things that you are interested in, accounts that you are interested in. When I first signed up to Twitter, I followed just like a handful of people who, you know, some of whom I'd met, some of whom I think I'd read some things of theirs. And then I followed a couple of like journals and things like that. And it kind of gave me like a nice mixed feed, and it gave me a good point to kind of talk to other people and stuff. But that feed and sort of what you're seeing is the first part of it. The second part of it is that you can then post to that feed. You can write something or post a message. So you get a 280 character message these days. It used to be 140, but it's 280. It has been for quite a while. And you type your message, press enter, and it then appears on the feed. Once it's up, you can't edit it or anything like that. You can delete them with pleasure, but you can't go back and change them. And it without, you know, unless your account is private, that is publicly visible. People can retweet it. They can what's called retweeting it, which is sort of sharing it with on their own timeline. And they can like it and they can comment on it, and then you get kind of like a thread of tweets where people are kind of discussing a single topic. But it is, as I said, it's a nice sort of a straightforward interface with relatively few things to kind of to worry about, and it's yeah, personally I like it as a sort of a snapshot. As things to sort of scroll through and have a bit of a read of the timeline when I feel like I've kind of got a minute to be looking at it. Now, it's great, sort of, you know, you've got Twitter, and you've got this thing, and you've got these 280 characters, but what do you even say? You know, you've got the you know, stack of papers next to you, you've got stack of data, you've got experiments running behind you, you've got your lunch on your desk, and what do you even share with people on social media? What makes something social media worthy? Well, the first thing that's quite good for social media is it's good to share the story of you, the story of yourself, because it's really important that and I think it's something that social media can help you understand a little bit, even if some parts of social media aren't as positive as others, that you are interesting. What you do is interesting, because what you do is probably relatively unique, or at least certainly rare on social media. No matter what branch of science you work in, what you do, you are in a very small percentage of people who do that job. And to people who don't do that job is kind of brilliantly fascinating. I have spent 5 hours at the lab bench just going click clack click clack click clack with tips coming off the end of my pipette, which for me is mind-numbingly boring, doing serial dilutions. But tweeting a bit about this massive pile of tips that I've just created, or tweeting about the fact that my hand has turned into some kind of misshapen claw, that is actually quite interesting to people who have never seen a pipette before, who have never seen that kind of work before. And that's a little bit of yourself coming through, and that's quite an important thing that social media lets you do, because it's great that you can share your papers and you can share your data, but it's also about sharing more than that. It's about sharing a little bit of yourself and a bit of your life and what you do every day. And we connect with each other through that. So if I skip to the last one, people love soap operas, which seems like a weird thing to say at this point, but people like watching other people's lives. It sounds almost a bit odd, but it's television ratings don't lie. We enjoy reality TV and we enjoy soap operas, and oddly enough, if you share your work that you think is uninteresting, or people may have even told you that, God, your work sounds really boring, well, to that person maybe. But try putting it on social media with a vast audience of people who are just dying to hear what kind of interesting stuff is going on in your lab, in your archive, in your research office, in your field study, because to them it really does add something quite kind of interesting to them. And it does, like, if you can talk about the fact that you couldn't go into work today because your cat has a really vicious cough, that's interesting to people too, because it doesn't mean that your work is somehow taken a backseat, or you're kind of going, oh no, I don't care about my work, I care, and it doesn't diminish that. It makes you human, and it makes your work have a kind of a richer context, that this strange person who's getting frustrated with piles of tips, they're actually a human being who worries about their cat, and that adds a kind of, it adds something, and it makes you sort of more approachable, and it makes your work more approachable. Just sharing something like this, I'm not saying you all have to draw cartoons that are oddly descriptive of your life, but this is a cartoon I did right back at the beginning of Errant Science, where all I wanted to do was just share a little bit about what got me to the job I had back in 2016, what was going through my mind, and things like that, because I wanted people to not just see that I was this postdoc who kept talking about fiber optics, or kept talking about trying to sense part per billions of ammonia or something, and actually that I'd had an interesting life, and I'd wanted to be lots of different things, and and that's quite interesting. I hope that some of you are kind of peering at the slide right now going, that is kind of interesting, because that's, the fact that I wanted to be a pathologist because I read way too much Patricia Cornwall when I was about 16, that's kind of interesting. Doesn't impact my day now, or my job, or anything else I do, but it's interesting, and it helps people build that connection with you, and then hopefully a connection with your work as well. So sharing things, it doesn't always have to be something Nobel Prize worthy, or something sort of incredibly detailed and thought out and carefully considered. Sometimes it can just be that you've run out of tea. Something really simple. Although I realize now, thinking about that comment I just made, I'm talking to an American audience. I really shouldn't have said a cup of tea. Coffee, I don't know, I guess you have tea, but it's not the same. This is an example. So this, I did this I think 3 days after I'd started a job at the University of Southampton, and it's not to do with my work. I saw it as I was walking on my way to my office, and it's weird. It's an art project, Rhino, that had been installed in the lobby of a building. There was an information card that had sadly faded in the sun, and it was just weird. And so I sent a picture of that. I put it online and went, I don't really know what this is about, but it's really cool. And people, that's quite interesting content. That's quite engaging, and people kind of then, fine, I wasn't sharing about my life, but people now know a little bit about a building that I work nearby. I'm enjoying the fact that I mentioned that there was a chance that people in America didn't know what tea was. And I like that the chat has just filled up with people going, no, we do know what tea is. We drink tea. So yay, the tea brigade. Very pleased to see all that. So here's some more examples of people sharing some stuff. So this is like Sammy. I mean, she's sharing something a bit sciencey. She's sharing some things about how she was doing a game called Compounded, which is just a board game about chemistry. This is some things from Boston University, where they're sort of sharing some things about socks and stuff like that. Again, they're interesting things from around your work, from who you are and what makes you and what makes your kind of your stuff interesting. And that's quite a nice stories to have. It really is. And I think they are some of the easiest things to share sometimes, because you're not worried about all the other things that you might be worried about if you're sharing your work. But I am going to get onto that now. So the story of you is good, but obviously you want to share the story of your work. Now, sharing the story of your work can be difficult. So I've got some specific examples of some pitfalls, but before I wanted to talk about some positive ideas of what could be shared as the story of your work. So it's important that you do give people a story. You don't just give people, here's my thing, and then you never talk about that again. Or today I did this on this piece of equipment, and then you never mention that again, or you never mention, you just jump from sort of thing you want to share to thing you want to share. And that's something people do a lot, unfortunately. That's something that is kind of I think it comes from publishing papers, which is what we're all very used to doing, and writing in conferences, where we'll do a poster, and then maybe we'll follow that up with a paper a year later. And that's it. That's the only time we might talk about that specific piece of research, and then we drop it and we go on to the next piece of work. Whereas social media, you want more of a story, and you want more stories about one piece of work. If you've got one piece of work and it is just one paper you want to share or want to talk about or want other people to see, then it's important not just to share it and say, hey, this is it, just look at it. It's important to think about ways that you can turn it into stories to discuss with people, or turn it into stories that other people might find interesting. If you've got something, think about it from different angles and from different perspectives. I say here, you don't need to be BuzzFeed, but it's that kind of almost like headline stuff. So here are some almost examples that I would suggest you don't follow. These are obviously real headlines cut from British news websites, but that's sort of almost examples of not particularly good turning your work into stories. But it is that kind of thing. You want something that's kind of catchy and that's going to kind of interest people and give people, raise a question and make people think a bit about what you've done. So I've got an example that I want to share. So this is an example of a paper that I did. It's not self-promoting, it's just easier to do things that I did, because obviously I then came up with the stories for it. If anybody else produces their own example, I'm happy to change this slide in future and I can promote their paper instead. So this was a sensor that I made for soil moisture content, using long period gratings. It's not important that you know what those are. And out of this, I wanted to try and come up with story examples. So here's some examples that I would say are sort of squarely bad examples. Things where I think, if you were to sort of share those on social media, you've gone too far. So if long period gratings are optical fibers, they're fiber optic based sensors, and they're dividing water with Netflix. I actually had somebody in our department who was absolutely convinced that we should write about how, you know, you could turn broadband cables and cables carrying Netflix and Disney Plus to your house into sensors, which you just can't. That's just wrong. But they were adamant that that would be an amazing headline. But the hyperbole has gone too far. And I think the same as with the others. You know, it will solve world water shortages. Probably not. It might help, but that's, you know, you're sort of over promising, and that's, you know, it's important not to go too crazy with these things. You know, go for things that are more inclusive, more sort of engaging with people, and things that might prompt discussion. So this paper, we actually shared it via all of these messages via social media, sort of over a period of time, where we reshared it and just reshared it with a slightly different sort of story or a message that we kind of wanted to kind of get across. So like, come read our paper on finding water with fiber optics. I mean, the fact that you can find water with fiber optics is very interesting to a lot of people. You know, and especially if you know what fiber optics are, that kind of adds a nice little like, I kind of know what those are. That's a thing I know about, but that doesn't sound like a thing that I understand. If you don't know what fiber optics are, well, then you've got our new paper on using light for testing soil and water. Or if you are actually quite well, you know, you understand the water sensing soil industry, then you've got things like possible alternatives to resistivity probes for soil moisture sensing. That one is less likely to kind of capture the public's imagination like the others are, but it is something that people who work in moisture sensing will be interested in. Resistivity probes are the gold standard probe that are bought in their millions every year. So to say there's an alternative for that, that's quite engaging and that's quite interesting. Not like the others, where they are very well targeted to sort of different sort of wider audiences. That one is more specifically targeted. And sometimes your stories kind of need to be. Sometimes you do, you know, you should always make sure that you're sharing with a broad public audience. But you also, you know, want to come up with something that helps you share it to the specific audiences that you might be interested in working with as an industrial partner or as a funding partner or even just funders. And that's quite important with these stories. And I think that's what I'm hoping you'll get from that, is it's not just about coming up with one, it's about coming up with a few that might capture different interests. Because if you just share it one and just have one shot on social media, then your one tweet will appear on someone's feed and then be gone. And making sure they keep reappearing a few times, but in interesting and different ways, is more likely to engage with people and give people sort of an interest in what you're doing. Here's some examples of some ways that are sort of shared some things, and different ways of sort of sharing interesting stories about things. This is 2 tweets that I did about one paper that I did. It was actually a paper I did on drawing comics. It turns out you can write papers on drawing comics, and sort of ways to sort of share things via sort of imagery like that. And then the other one is from Boston University, who did a really successful Ask Me Anything or an AMA on Reddit. And that's quite interesting because that allows you to share a lot of stories on AMAs. So those Reddit and AMAs, I have to say, I've not covered Reddit much or at all in this. But even that tweet is really good because it shows, you know, that you're engaged about sort of sharing a story using some good emojis, and it shows that you're using different social media, and it's quite a kind of a nice open way of sharing things. At the end of this, I've got a little activity planned where I'm hopefully going to get you to, as many of you who can do it, to have a look at writing a story about something that you're working on at the moment, something that's kind of like a 280 character thing. So we are going to come back to this. So this is sort of fair warning that this will come around again in a minute, and I will make you, well, I can't make you, I will hope that you all have a go at writing a little bit of a story, and then I'm going to read a few out and talk about them and sort of say, which ones are particularly good as kind of examples from your peers at Boston University. So you're not just relying on the things that I've picked out. Now, that's all well and good, sharing things, but on social media is important. The clue's in the name. You have to be social on social media. You can't just broadcast things. If you want to do that, go on local public TV or radio. That's what they are. They're broadcast media. This is social media. You need to talk to other people. It's not as scary as it sounds. They generally don't bite, but you do need to do it. Socializing on social media is something that's easy to do the more you do it, like anything, but it's easy to do if you just start sort of relatively simple. So you can do it in various different ways. So the sort of the way you do it on Twitter is you @tag. So you would write a tweet. So if you're going to say write a tweet and say, hey, I thought this talk by @ArantScience was great, then I will see that. It will kind of pop up on my phone and go, hey, someone just tagged you in a tweet. And I would then look at it and go, oh, I'll reply to that and go, hi there, @brilliant BU researcher. Thanks for this. And I will sort of reply. And that's a good way of then starting. That's kind of, it's a public conversation, but it's a conversation where they will sort of are likely to reply. At the very least, they will see your things. So that's where you would be tagging them. When you share other people's stuff, I talked about that a little bit earlier. So on Twitter, that's called retweeting. So if you saw a tweet, for example, the one advertising this talk today that Boston University Communications Group put out, and you think, oh, hey, yeah, I want other people to know about this, and that's quite an interesting thing. Then at the bottom of the tweet, there's a little button that's kind of like two little arrows. You click it, and it then takes the tweet that was on, the timeline that you can see, and then puts it on as though it's something you've sent. So it will appear on everyone who follows you. It will appear on all of their timelines. And in that way, you've shared that thing to all the people that follow you. And that's important because the tweet that you've shared, the people who produced it can see that you've shared it. So they get a sense of, oh, hey, brilliant, that person has taken the time to share our thing. Ah, what a cool person. And that's quite an important part of social media as well. Not just contacting people and directly talking to people, but sharing other people's things, sharing other people's successes, and sharing other people's work, because it's a kind of a community that helps and builds each other. How you get that balance is a little bit up to you. There is something called the 5-3-2 rule, which was come up with by somebody about a decade ago, which is the idea is you share 5 posts of content from other people. So you would kind of retweet 5 things, and then you do 3 posts about your own stuff, and then you do 2 posts that are really good fun and are kind of about you personally. So those would be the ones about the cat with the cough, and it's not a bad rule of thumb. It's a very specific series of numbers for something that really is quite fluid and tends to change a little bit on what sort of things you're posting when and what's kind of going on, which I'll talk about in a minute. And it's important to remember, don't stick to things like that too much. Just be human about it. Share other people's stuff. Talk about your own stuff. Talk about, the story of you. I mean, things that are fun about you personally. Talk about yourself. Talk about what things that you like and things you didn't like. It doesn't need to be everything that you've eaten, but it's nice to share some things. Somebody asked, if this is specific to Twitter, or does it apply to LinkedIn and Facebook? Well, the 5-3-2 rule was actually invented for another social media platform, which was immediately shut down about a year after this rule was first coined. You could take from that what you will. but it does, I mean, people do use it and apply it to other platforms. I would say somewhere like Facebook, it does still work, and certainly somewhere like Instagram, it's a bit harder to work because it's sharing things there is a little bit different. But somewhere like LinkedIn is a bit different in so much as there probably isn't as much fun and sort of like and sort of personal messages on there. It's a little bit more professional, but there is a big emphasis on sharing other people's successes and other people's things, as well as talking about yourself. So I think actually it does still hold up on something like LinkedIn as well. But if you want to make sure that the things you're sharing are both things that other people can easily find and link to, but also so that you can link to and find other things, there's things called hashtags. If you don't know what a hashtag is, here is a very, very quick whistle-stop talk about how you do that, how you are using hashtags. Hashtags are sort of a way of making your things within your tweet or whatever searchable or findable. All of your tweets, as I say, is text searchable. Twitter doesn't like ignore that text and sort of prevent it from being searched. But hashtags are sort of a more specific way of making very, very clear that this tweet is about a particular subject or about a particular thing. So if you were to share a tweet about, I don't know, the talk going on today, you could use the nice hashtag that I have put at the bottom of every slide, because share your science is used by lots of people. But right now I'm saying, if you want to talk about my slides on Twitter, use the hashtag share your science. So if I then go to that hashtag later and see who posted tweets with that hashtag in, I will hopefully see a few people online today who join Twitter later or already are on Twitter. And it's a good way of almost collecting those tweets together. Some of them are kind of like that one I've done today, and it's used by people for all kinds of things. It won't just be used for this talk. Some of them are very topical. So right now, I'm sure there is various hashtags trending all over the world, and specifically in America or specifically in Boston. Twitter is quite helpful in so much as it will actually show you what is trending in your area, in your kind of locale. So it will show you what's trending in Boston, or it will show you what's trending in the United States. You can kind of go and see, and then you can click on that, and then you can engage in that conversation. You can read things within that hashtag, or you can add to it. Personally, when I'm sort of sharing research, as I think you might have seen in the earlier tweets, I'll use research area specific hashtags. I might write a little message, and then at the end of it, add hashtag fibers, hashtag optics, hashtag hydrogen, or something like that, to try to make it clear that this tweet is all these interesting things. There's various sort of ones that aren't anything to do with subjects. If you're talking about anti-racism or mental health or other sort of social issues that you want to be talking about and want to be sharing, they're very good for making sure that your tweets are part of that wider conversation. We've run events with people, live events and presentations and conferences, and often conferences are now creating hashtags specifically for that. So we use Cartoon Abstract for some work that we often do, and that hashtag is almost entirely tweets either about us or things that we've produced. But things like EWOFs 21 or something like that is, you can be sure that for at least the sort of the week that the conference is going, if you want to know what people at the conference are talking about, you can use that hashtag. So it's a good way of you yourself finding things, but also sometimes if you're hosting something, you can kind of control where that message is and make sure that you've grouped that message together, which is both important for the conversations. And again, as an event organizer, it's quite important because you can show the impact of what your event has had on social media by collecting them all together and saying, hey, on the day we had 100 tweets to our hashtag, which is quite an important thing to demonstrate that it has been successful or it has been discussed. So here's some examples. There's one that I use quite a bit, which is real-time chem. So real-time chem is particularly good for chemistry. Clues in the name again. So I asked for somebody. I needed a brick solution done on a refractometer. My refractometer was broken. I didn't have one, and I just asked publicly on a worldwide social media network. And really conveniently, someone who worked in a lab 50 miles away from me said, "Yep, they could do it the next day." And so I drove it down there, and they very kindly ran it for me and calibrated it for me, and so I could drive back to the lab, and it was really helpful. There's one called iCanHas PDF. That one is brilliant, but probably don't tell anybody that you're using it, because it's almost certainly breaking like a million publishing laws. But it's a really good way of getting PDFs in a completely legit manner. And please delete this slide from the slide deck, so I'm not in some way liable for telling you all to go get free PDFs online. And then at Boston University, you've got a good example of where they're doing one for Trans Awareness Week, which again is really important for making sure that the conversations you're having on those issues are sort of all collected together and are part of the wider publication, so that, you know, your Twitter account when you start might only have 1 or 2 followers, but if you join in some of those conversations, people who are in those conversations might go, "Hey, this person has something interesting to say, I'm going to follow them and see what else they have to say." And it's a good way of building yourself up as well as kind of, you know, just not just taking part in those things. Don't go crazy with it. People do use way too many sometimes. You know, if you've got more hashtags than you've got words in your message, you've gone wrong. Do just try to kind of stick to kind of key ones. There is a kind of like a definite like golden zone between like only having like a hashtag every other tweet or having like 50 hashtags. They're definitely like, you know, 3 or 4 is kind of fine sometimes. You can get away with more than that sometimes as well, but just please don't overdo it. They make for really hard to read tweets. As someone has very kindly put in the chat, there is a little bit of a useful thing you can do to hashtags as well, which is to try and make them a bit more readable. Make sure that you know, because they all have to be like no spaces. Make sure that the first letter of each actual word is a capital, as they've done in Trans Awareness Week here, because again, it makes it so much easier to read. And there have been examples of hashtags that do look utterly hilarious, including one all about a British singer called Suzanne Boyle, which I will just allow you to go and Google and look up what that was, because I don't really want to say it out loud. But also, you know, I've talked a bit about kind of how you do it, but it's important to think about who you socialize with and who you share your work with. You know, sharing other people's work and sharing the sort of the right people's work is quite important. You don't want to just be sharing stuff at random because you feel like you should. Do try and find people who are interested to you and to your work, or even to the things that you want to share in your personal life, and make sure that it's kind of them that you're engaging with. You know, it sounds odd to kind of say that, but you can get a bit down the rabbit hole of kind of in with, you know, all kinds of conversations that really, you know, probably aren't really worth your time. It's nice to be a little bit thoughtful and selective. And certainly, you know, you know, it's still quite a big thing that, you know, oh, if someone follows you, you follow them back. Well, there's a little bit of that sometimes, but what tends to happen is if you do that, you get a timeline full of people talking about stuff that you're not really very interested in and isn't really engaging. And very quickly, you find you're not really talking to those people, and you're not really talking, you can't see the important people that you do want to talk to. So you need to be a little bit selective about like who you follow and who's in your timeline. And similarly, when you talk to people, engage with people, talk to people about their work, comment on their research, engage with if you know, if there are conversations going on, it's kind of fine to kind of join in with those conversations and things like that. You know, if you socialize, people will start to follow you and again think that you have interesting things to say. You can find people using sort of hashtags. So if there is a sort of a hashtag specific to your field, then you can use that, or you can kind of search and find people that way. Engage with people who you think in your field or in your area are already doing well at social media, because they will give you clues of things that you could maybe try or you could maybe do to engage with people. That's quite a good, if when you get your first like 5 people that you follow, do try and choose people who are good, and obviously make sure you follow the Boston University accounts and things like that, so that you can kind of see what's going on sort of on social media locally, so to speak. And then there's been a few questions about this. It's really important to try and save yourself time. Social media, Twitter is quite good because you can do sort of a one post very quickly, and kind of get through things, you know, and get a post done and get back to your work. But sometimes there isn't a moment to do that, and you have to kind of put the mental energy into thinking about it, and it can really help you to save time and plan things out. Plan how you're going to share some of your stories. You know, if you've got a paper that you want to share with all those different stories that you've come up with, plan to share one of them every couple of days, or share one, you know, once a week for the next month or something, to make sure there's a kind of a consistent amount of things going out. Avoid what I'd call like flurry posting. You know, when you've got a brilliant thing in your head and you just want to talk about it on, or like share lots of it, try not to do too much all at once and sort of posting a million different things. Someone's mentioned something about sort of threading, and that's fine if you're going to do a tweet that might require sort of more explanations, and you can do sort of multiple tweets. That's where you can write one tweet and then write a second tweet linked to it. So that's called sort of like a thread, and then you get a good, you know, you can have your own conversation, and then other people can add to your conversation as well. That way you can share sort of longer content, but make sure you're sort of, you're sharing stories over a sort of a decent length of time, rather than kind of doing it all at once and then going silent for 2 weeks. People will kind of, no offense, but forget about you. And it's important to kind of get that good pacing, really. And you know, if you want to plan, look at things that are coming up, look at what days you might want to say something about. I occasionally use nationaltoday.com, which is incredibly American centric. It's, you know, it's very much all about America's national days, but there are also world days, and there are quite a lot about research on there as well. And they're, you know, really, you know, you kind of know in example, it's easy to then know in advance when World Mental Health Day is, for example, where you might want to share your own mental health stories, or you might want to support other people who are sharing their stories on that day. And it's worth just making a note, oh, hey, I should log in, I should look at the hashtag, and I should maybe retweet some stuff that I want to share. You know, if there's something as specific as National Radiological Technology Day, which turns out it's a thing, and you work in radiological technology, it's really good to make sure you've got a tweet ready to go for November the 7th. You know, I've given you plenty of notice, so anybody who who works on radiological technology, I hope you have written that down and are working on it right now. I'm not sure if Boston University has a cheese curd department, but on the off chance you do, I'm really sorry, but you missed that. It was October the 15th. And share your institution stuff too. Share the things that Boston University is also talking about. You don't need to share all of them, but share some of them, and make sure that, you know, people see that you're supporting your institution, you know, and things like that. That's quite important as well, because it gives people, you know, a sense of where you are and things like that. So this is sort of showing some quite visual stuff, because it's, you know, the things that you share. I've talked a lot about messages, but you might note all of the examples up to this point, bar I think one, have all had pictures. And if you look at the BU accounts, they will be full of pictures, of illustrative examples of things, of pictures with text in or quotes in, and that's your work and what you do. It's really, you know, can be very important just to add little pictures to them, add sort of interesting things to them. You know, they don't have to be detailed pictures. Harking back to the sort of the things that are interesting to other people, you know, you can share quite boring things is quite fascinating to other people. You know, or, you know, if you can share videos, you can share animations, you can share GIFs. These are 2 that we made for people. where if you want to, they don't have to be made by a cartoonist. They can just be silly GIFs that you find on the internet. But even just like adding a little bit of something that sort of has motion, has something catches people's eye, and it adds that little bit of interest. There's a good reason why newspapers and websites all have big pictures and on the front. It's because that's what kind of draws people's eyes in. And the same is true on social media. If you can share a picture, it's, there's statistics and stuff to show it, but it's more likely to get retweeted, and it's, more likely to get clicked on and engaged with, and all those things. But this is, I did promise that I would talk a little bit about difficulties and about some of the issues of sharing research online. I don't want to go on about it too long because, it's kind of a very broad topic and often quite specific for areas, but trolls is a thing. Trolls exist. We know trolls exist. They're written about in newspapers. They are horrible people who just really like to have arguments with people online. In my experience, it's really not worth trying to win those arguments sometimes. It's a fact of life. You're very lucky in that you have some really good support in the communications department of Boston University, and if it's something that you do experience and that there are issues, go talk to them about how to deal with it and stuff like that. But it is thankfully a lot rarer than sometimes it can feel on through media stories, but they are a fact of unfortunate social media life. The other thing that kind of comes up a lot when we discuss with academics is sharing the wrong thing. What if I share something that should be secret? What if I say the wrong thing and upset people? So there's a few kind of general rules you can work by. Generally, don't share anything that you wouldn't tell someone in a coffee break at a conference. If you are working on something that you think is secret, you wouldn't go blabbing about it at a conference, and you really shouldn't go blabbing about it on sort of online either. You can talk a lot about your work without giving away that kind, those kind of details. And as I said, some of the fascinating interest is not in the specific concentrations you're using or the particular technique that you're using, but in some of the other things about your life and about your lab work or about your research. So it's good to be non-specific sometimes, but that's a kind of a good thing to have in your brain. And the other thing is don't say anything, that you wouldn't say directly to a person's face. I'd like to think this rule is sort of universal, but I've met some people who say all sorts of things to people's faces. But it's just be nice to each other. There is a rule that I advise people to follow called Wheaton's Law. For any of you that want to know what that is, again, it's one of those things I suggest you Google. But it's a very good law, and it basically says, don't be a horrible person. Just if you think about what you're doing and you think, am I making someone else feel rubbish? Maybe don't say that. These are relatively simple ideas to follow, but they're things that if you just keep them in the back of your head when you're writing things, that's normally enough to make sure that what you're sharing is appropriate and it is positive. And as I said, if in doubt, contact the team. You have a team dedicated to helping you. Most people do social media and they're just doing it on their own. You do it with a big department behind you who can fix stuff, sort stuff out, and make sure that you get the right training from people like me and advice, and that can be massively helpful. So do just kind of go talk to them, ask them. They've got lots of experience. They've been doing this for a while with lots of other researchers. But yeah, keep those things in mind. And if in doubt, go ask for some help. Here's some sort of examples of some more things that I've done, which are sort of things that are non-specific. So one of them was something that I shared. That was my second day at my job, where I would be impressed if anyone knows what the hell I was doing in that photograph and what I then published a paper on about a year later on that topic. Well, you can't, because it's an interesting photograph. It's very pretty, but nobody can infer anything from it. But it's quite interesting and it's quite kind of visually appealing. And it was something that people were quite kind of taken by. And people did ask a lot of questions about it. I didn't answer them, but I did talk to them about kind of what I was doing there. And that started a conversation without revealing my work. And there's some other good examples by Boston University to the side. There where they're talking about other things that they're sort of sharing and talking about without giving away, the secret of what they're doing, which I think is some of the things that people do. So sort of starting to come to the end now, but I want to talk about some of the outcomes of the social media that I've kind of, things that I've really kind of got out of it, and other people I've worked with have got out of it. So just to kind of read these through really quickly, we've got collaborative projects that we've started with other universities, both back in my research labs and then in other research labs that I've worked with. One thing that happens a lot is quite a lot of invitations to talk at institutes, and later on I'll talk about media interviews and things like that. If you are good at communicating your work online and through social media, that translates to other places, and people become interested in you as an expert who is capable of explaining their field, which is a surprisingly rare thing. And that's quite powerful in building up kind of a personal profile as well as a profile for your department and your work. We've got discounted equipment. It turns out if you talk about random bits of equipment makers quite like that, and they're like, oh, we'll give it to you if you definitely tweet. We've had to be very strict about them not telling us what to tweet, but yeah, that happens. Formation of large grants and collaborations, again, that comes out of collaborative projects really, because it's groups that didn't know each other got talking on social media and then wanted to go and work together and do things, particularly groups in Japan and the UK is one I'm thinking of that worked very well, where they wouldn't have really known about each other if that initial contact hadn't come together. And then sort of other things like, companies that are interested in saying, hey, that thing you were talking about, that's quite interesting to us. Can we trade emails? And there's been quite a few examples of that. And then lastly, on kind of quite personal levels, things like job offers, where people have gone, oh, that person works in that area. Would you be interested in talking to us about that? And then on the other side of that, it's had a really big impact on increasing recruitment. So finding PhD students is something certainly at the moment over here is very difficult. And anything departments can do to try and increase the attractiveness of their programs and their research to potential recruits of PhD students or staff really does help. And having that kind of public profile where you can share lots of little interesting things about sort of what life would be like doing that is quite powerful. How to get started? Join Twitter. I've talked about Twitter loads. It's really easy to join. Just go sign up. I mean, that's it. You can join the others, but just join Twitter. It's the quickest and the easiest. There's no more to this slide. The only thing you need to do to get started is go sign up with Twitter. You can then do more things. You can manage your time really carefully and make sure that the time that you're doing for social media doesn't go too much. You can kind of think about how, I've already talked about not letting your account go silent, keeping it active and things like that, making it part of your coffee or finding time in your day. You can do all of that. Join Twitter and then have a think about how it might fit in, how it would kind of work. Send your first tweet. Start thinking about when you could maybe tweet more regularly. You could start with stuff about sports or games or books or anything you're more comfortable with, just to try and get you over that kind of initial little hurdle to talking about something online and to talking about things on Twitter. It really doesn't take a lot, and you don't have to tweet every single day. Just start tiny. Just start a little bit and start to use some of those hashtags and mentions and things like that to help you go. And you can do some of that strategizing. You can plan things in advance. You can schedule stuff. So there's been a couple of questions about scheduling things with Later, with Buffer and Hootsuite and TweetDeck and Sprinkler and a million others. They are quite useful. Almost all of them are sort of free for a certain number of tweets. You can put in a load of different things and then do them, send out, tweets, once every 3 or 4 days or something, and you don't even have to log in. The danger with that is if you're not logging in and you're not engaging with other people and sharing other people's work, then you lose that 5-3-2 thing. You're just sharing your own work, and you need to be social on social media. So scheduling is great, but do try and find that time to just share stuff that little bit more, and that's very important. But don't do the flurry thing. Don't just forget about it and walk away. Set yourself an alarm, read your tweets for 10 minutes, again, over tea or coffee or something. So yeah. Now, before you finish, I just wanted to ask anybody who's been still with us and not had to duck out early or anything, if you can come up with a single sentence story describing your work. So if you want to have a think about these and post them to the chat while I just quickly sum up, and then I'll read out a few and then start answering some questions as well. So come up with just a single sentence. It doesn't have to be to a whole 280 characters. It can be really small, but this is your opportunity to try and sort of share something. And I'll, a bit like a kind of like a widely appealing story. Not quite BuzzFeed, but somewhere close. So yeah, pop it in the chat while I do a bit of a sum up on things that we've done. So hopefully, as you're thinking about your story, you're thinking that social media is not scary, that it is a good place to share your work, and it has some positives that you can get out of it, whether it's personal positives, positives for your department, and it's not something that's going to eat all of your time. It's something that you can fit in your own way and share things in your own way. And if you do share things, it will build up a lot. We've had quite a few questions about analytics, which I'll get to in the end. But one immediate feedback is if you do discuss and talk to people and engage, you do get people following you. It's quite an immediate response. And the more of that happens, the more those discussions can happen. Don't forget that you've got backup, and there's people who are there to kind of help you. And if you do sign up to Twitter, or when you sign up to Twitter, I shouldn't say if, you've all been persuaded, do talk to myself or Michelle, who is my partner. Both of us have got a wealth of experience of kind of helping people on social media, and our help for you doesn't end at the end of this talk. For the next few weeks, if you tweet at us, or if you kind of like wave at us virtually on social media and on Twitter, we'll talk to you back. We'll try and reply. We'll follow you if we can remember it. We'll try and share some things for you and make sure that you kind of get a bit of a kind of an easy start into Twitter. And you can ask us further questions on there as well. But do come and ask us on Twitter, because you have to prove that you got onto Twitter to ask us the questions about Twitter. I feel like that's a low bar to set for answering deeper questions in the future. But we're really chatty, and we're really happy to talk and help people. So right, I'm going to read out some of the things, and then I will try and answer some questions in my remaining 10 minutes. So let's have a little look. So did you know a new free electronic textbook on mathematical methods for molecular science is now available? That's a really good one. Not least because it was so good, it got me to read it out and advertise it to the 100 or so people that are on this call. And the next person who says that I used to study toilet bowl cleaner advertising. Now I research how to clinically consume media content. That is brilliant. So that person, immediately fascinating. If that person could please ping me on Twitter, and I will now forever follow their research, because I love that combination of life story. There's I can't read all these. I'm just saying that in advance. I'm not choosing them by anything. So if I don't read yours, it's not that I think, oh no, that's terrible. It's just that I'm trying to just pick a few. Here we go. I study how a huge ocean current in one side of the Pacific Ocean affects the other side of the Pacific Ocean. That's quite good. I quite like that. That's kind of interesting. I want to know more. It's like the butterfly effect with the sides of the Pacific Ocean. Um, Answering important questions about repetitive head impacts in sport and risks for later life brain issues. So that has been in the media quite a bit. So that's a really good one. So that's quite catchy because it links to things that are already being discussed in the public forum. So that's a good one because it's quite specific, but it's quite specific to something that is already in people's mindsets. So yeah. Getting on to sort of a question briefly, one thing that came up, I think, a few times by a few different people was analytics and judging how well you're doing and how well your impressions are and what your engagement is and all of that. I talked about some of those scheduling assistants, which are really good because they manage your time, but they'll also track a little bit of analytics. Twitter itself has a little analytics engine that you can click on and go, oh, look, I've got X number of impressions. Those are, I would say, cripplingly addictive at times. You can tweet some stuff and then you can look at them and go, oh my God, it got a 5. That's amazing. And then next week you do it and it goes to 6. You're like, oh my God, I'm a genius. I'm phenomenal. I'm such an amazing social media guru. And then the next week it will go to 4 and you fall into a pit of despair because everything has gone wrong. The short answer is that stuff goes up and down. It can be very variable. Analytics are good on larger numbers. They're a bit more difficult, particularly when you're starting out and you've got a relatively small follower count. Once they get larger, they do become interesting and they do become something worth paying attention to try and optimize and increase your impressions or increase things like your engagement rate. The engagement rate is when people click on your tweet or click on your content. So yeah, those things are good, but they are very much a case of just not right away. They might be something for later. If you look at them right away, I'm willing to bet it will drive you slightly insane. Everybody goes through it though. If you do start checking it, everybody goes through analytics addiction and then slow recovery. We've all been there. We've all been rocking back and forth at night. But you'll get through it. You'll be fine. You'll be okay. But there's simple things you can do to look at, which hashtag should you use, and Twitter will generally tell you how many people are talking about which hashtag. So if there's 2 different hashtags for ecology or a particular thing in ecology, use the one that's more popular. Try and go towards sort of the popular side of those. So yeah, that's quite useful. A couple of people, and then very conveniently, someone has just asked it right now, which is personal accounts versus lab accounts. So we've seen and we've helped people with both. Lab accounts can be very good, but they suffer a little bit from a couple of really motivated people, and if they move and leave the lab, the account can die sometimes. That's happened quite a bit. And the other thing, it's very hard to make that lab account feel approachable and sort of personal. That's quite difficult, whereas personal accounts, that's much more easy. It's easier to talk about your burrito alongside your cutting edge waveform research. Whereas a sort of a group account, it's harder to find some of those stories sometimes, and it can end up a little bit drier, but they can work really well. And sometimes it can do well to have kind of both. It can do well to have quite an official lab account and then encourage those people in the lab to all have their own accounts. And the lab account can just do simple stuff like sharing all of your papers or sharing all of your papers and then occasionally some of the tweets of your group. Again, it's more involved, but it can be very rewarding for a lab because it gives you a kind of a real sense of like lab identity. But of course, again, if you do a personal account, you can get all the sort of the personal benefits out of it as well, and sort of building up your own profile as a researcher and as somebody in your field, rather than sort of just disappearing into a particular lab. So yeah. So I'm going to read one more little short thing, and then I'll see if there's any other questions, and then I think we'll wrap up. I develop and test digital interventions to monitor health behavior change, especially among those not motivated to change. Wow, I really like that one because it seems to fit very well with people I have sometimes taught social media to. Some of them are not motivated to change. Luckily, you have all signed up to come to a social media talk, so I suspect you are all very motivated to change and all very motivated to do social media. So if you want to learn about behavioral things, hopefully that person will get a Twitter account and start talking about it online, and we can all hear about how digital interventions can motivate health behavior changes. I think that's would be incredibly useful. Molly, is there any particular questions that I've missed from anybody that have come in that you think that need answering? If you want to direct message me, or if you want to raise them.
I think you caught everything that was in the chat. Some people had some pretty similar questions about time commitment and the way to structure their social media account, which you addressed in your presentation. So thanks so much.
Cool. And I think I've answered everyone's questions. So again, I think I should just thank Boston University's Marketing and Communications Department and their Office of Research, who are amazing for having me. And thank you to all of the faculty and staff for coming and sort of listening. Do get the slides, look at the stuff we put there and the links and things like that. I'd really like people to kind of engage with us and come and talk to us. If you've got a session with me tomorrow, I can answer even more there, and I can get into some really specific stuff about your particular area. So if you've got a one-to-one session with me tomorrow, that'd be great. Michelle has some one-to-one sessions still available. Molly has put a link in the chat. So I think if any faculty want further help and further specific help, Michelle is available to talk to you tomorrow. But yes, I think that's a great place to leave it. And I'll say thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.